There is a particular kind of woman that the world learns to look through. Not past. Through. She's not ugly enough to pity, not beautiful enough to pursue, not rich enough to court, not poor enough to rescue. She exists in the exact center of every room she enters, and somehow no one ever sees her standing there. She pours the tea. She corrects the children's Latin. She smiles at the appropriate moment and disappears before anyone thinks to ask her name. Miss Evelyn Ashby had been that woman for 24 years. She had made her peace with it. Or something close to peace. The kind that sits quietly in the corner of your heart and doesn't cause trouble because it has learned, as Evelyn had learned, that causing trouble gets you nowhere. It gets you dismissed without reference. It gets you standing at the back of your sister's wedding in a dress that isn't fine enough for the front pews, watching happiness happen to someone else, and writing about it that night by candlelight in the only place that had ever belonged entirely to her. Her diary, she wrote everything in it, the furious things, the tender things, the observations so precise and devastating that she would have been cast from every decent house in England if anyone had ever read them. She wrote because it was the only place in the world where she was allowed to exist without apology, where she could be sharp and sad and occasionally quietly hilarious, where she could say, without flinching, what she actually thought of the world she moved through like a ghost. She never imagined anyone would read it. She certainly never imagined him. William Ashford, the Duke of Ashford, England's most decorated and feared general, a man who had stood on the bloodied plains of Spain and Belgium and made decisions that moved 10,000 men like pieces on a board, a man described by his peers as carved from English winter, cold, immovable, and somehow, despite everything, necessary. A man who had not laughed in 4 years, not been surprised in 4 years, not felt the particular, helpless pull of wanting something he could not command in 4 years. He sat on the floor of his study at Caldemere to read her diary. He read it through the night without stopping. By the time dawn reached the tall windows of the estate, he had already decided that he was going to find her. He just hadn't admitted yet that the conspiracy was only the second reason. She was the first. This is the story of a woman who wrote her whole unguarded self onto paper and sent it, by accident, into the hands of the one man in England who needed to read it. And a man who spent 4 years being the most powerful person in every room he entered, only to be completely undone by the private voice of a governess from Derbyshire who believed with quiet and terrible certainty that she was not the kind of woman anyone ever chose first. He was going to prove her wrong about that. If Evelyn's voice already feels like someone you know, someone you've been, or someone you've quietly rooted for your whole life, then you are exactly where this story was made for. Before we go any further, take 3 seconds and subscribe, not for the algorithm, for yourself. So the next time we tell a story like this one, it finds you. Hit the like if you believe Evelyn deserves everything that is coming to her, and drop a comment right now telling us where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. Now, let's go to Derbyshire, Thornfield Manor, Derbyshire, November 1814. The schoolroom at Thornfield Manor smelled of tallow candles, chalk dust, and the particular damp cold that lives inside old stone houses in November, the kind that settles into the walls by October and does not leave until April. The fire in the grate had been laid hours earlier by a housemaid who had not thought to add enough coal, and it had been doing its dutiful, inadequate best ever since. Evelyn Ashby did not complain about the cold. She had learned some time ago that complaining about the cold, the light, or the meals served to the upper servants' table was the kind of thing that made employers reconsider a governess's disposition, and a governess with an uncertain disposition was a governess who found herself standing on a road with her trunk and nowhere to go. She had been on that road once already. She did not intend to be on it again. She sat at the schoolroom table after supper, the children long since put to bed, a single candle burning at her elbow and a small, well-worn leather diary open before her. The initials E.A. were pressed into the cover in a simple stamp, a gift from her father years ago, before the debts and the dismissal and the quiet unraveling of the only life she'd known as a child. The leather had softened with age. The pages were thick with her handwriting, slanted slightly to the right, the letters small. And even because she had learned to conserve paper long before she learned anything else about conservation, she dipped her quill and wrote. The entry was dated the 12th of November, 1814. Thomas asked me today why I was sad. I told him I wasn't sad at all, that I was perfectly well. And he looked at me with those large brown eyes that see entirely too much for a boy of 7, and said, "Your eyes are sad even when you smile, Miss Ashby." I could not write for 10 minutes after he said it. I sat with my quill in my hand and stared at the wallpaper, the yellow stripe one, the one that's peeling near the window, and I thought, what a thing to be seen clearly by someone who hasn't yet learned that you're not supposed to look. I told him that sometimes grown people carry a little sadness the way some people carry an umbrella. Not because it's raining, but because it might. He seemed to accept this. He is a good child, better than this house deserves. She stopped, looked up at the dark window. Outside, the grounds of Thornfield were a flat nothing, the kind of rural Derbyshire, darker, that has no bottom to it. She had arrived at Thornfield Manor 8 months earlier, hired by Mr. and Mrs. Hargreave to instruct their 3 children, Thomas, 7, and the twins Rose and Nan, 5. The advertisement had promised a comfortable room, use of the library on Tuesdays, and an annual salary that was, by the standards of the profession, neither insulting nor generous. Evelyn had taken it without negotiating because the alternative had been returning to her sister's house in Lincolnshire, and she had rather face another cold Derbyshire winter than become a permanent weight on Clara's household. Clara. She thought of the letter that had come that morning. She picked up her quill again. A letter from Clara today. She writes in that bright, careful way she has when she's trying not to say the real thing. The real thing, as far as I can interpret it across 140 miles of English countryside, is that Lord Brent does not much enjoy receiving my letters, and so would I perhaps write less frequently. She didn't say that, of course. She said she was very busy, and the winter was hard on her nerves, and she hoped I was keeping well. I am keeping well. I am keeping well in the way that empty rooms keep well, quietly, without complaint, and not quite serving the purpose they were built for. Clara means no harm. She never does. She married upward, and she is learning the particular art of surviving a husband who considers her family an inconvenience, and I do not blame her for it. I simply miss her. I miss the version of her that used to sit on the kitchen step with me when we were girls and talk about the kind of life we were going to have. She has a life now. I have Derbyshire. The candle guttered. Evelyn steadied it with a careful hand, then glanced at the small clock on the mantel. 10:30. She ought to be in bed. She was up at 6 to begin Thomas's Latin before breakfast, and the twins were brutal before their morning porridge. But the schoolroom was the only room in the house that was genuinely hers at this hour, and she was not quite ready to surrender it. She wrote for another quarter of an hour. She wrote about a letter she had received, not from Clara, but from a former pupil, a girl named Harriet, now grown and married. who had sent a brief, sweet note to say that she still remembered the Greek myths Evelyn had taught her. She wrote about a book she had found in the Hargreave Library, a volume of natural philosophy, which she had been reading in small pieces on Tuesday evenings when the library was open to her. She wrote about the oak tree at the edge of the east garden that had lost its last leaves the previous Wednesday in a single gust of wind, all at once, as though it had simply decided to be done with autumn. And then, at the bottom of the last page available that evening, she wrote the thing she hadn't meant to write. The thing that came out, before she could arrange it, into something more managed. I had a dream 2 nights ago that I have not been able to shake. I do not remember all of it. I remember a room with tall windows and firelight, and someone asking me a question. Not an obligatory question, not the how do you do kind that means nothing and expects nothing. An actual question, the kind that expects a real answer. The kind that means the person asking it is prepared to listen. I woke up before I could answer them. I am 24 years old. I have been told, in various polite and impolite ways, that I am adequate, competent, quiet, and unremarkable. That I am plain enough to be trusted and capable enough to be useful. I have been told that I am very good with children, which is a thing people say to women who are not considered good for much else. I have not been told, not once, not by anyone, that I was the person someone chose. Not second, not by default, not because the alternative was worse. First, before the others, before the practical considerations, before the family arrangements and the financial necessities and the social requirements, I am afraid. And I do not say this in self-pity. I say it as plainly as I can because this is the only place I am allowed to be plain. I am afraid that I will live my whole life waiting for that, and it will simply never come. Not because I am unworthy of it. I do not think I am unworthy of it, but because the world has never once stopped moving long enough to look in my direction. She closed the diary, sat for a moment with both hands flat on the cover, as if sealing something inside. Then she blew out the candle, tucked the diary under her arm, and went upstairs to bed. The following morning was the kind of November morning that makes you philosophical about the nature of existence, whether you want to be or not. Low grey sky, frost on the garden flagstones, the smell of coal smoke from the kitchen fires drifting through the ground, floor of the manor in slow blue-grey ribbons. Evelyn had Thomas's Latin book open on the schoolroom table, a cup of rapidly cooling tea at her elbow, and a headache behind her left eye that she was choosing to ignore. The manor was in a state. Mrs. Hargreave's elder brother, a man named Mr. Dent, had arrived the previous evening for a fortnight's visit, and he had brought with him 3 horses, 2 servants, and an air of self-importance so dense it seemed to shift the furniture in whatever room he entered. Mrs. Hargreave had been aflutter since his arrival. Mr. Hargreave had been retreating to his study at increasingly strategic intervals. The upstairs maids were scurrying with the particular energy of people who know they will be blamed for something they haven't done yet. In the middle of all of this, Evelyn had been asked, the night before, to do a small errand. There was a satchel of legal documents, correspondence regarding the estate boundary dispute, that had been dragging on for the better part of 2 years, that needed to be dispatched to the village magistrate, Mr. Collins, by that morning's post-rider. Could Miss Ashby please ensure the satchel was ready and waiting at the front hall by 7? Evelyn had said yes, because she always said yes, and because it was not, in fact, an unreasonable request. The difficulty was that in the chaos of the previous evening, Mr. Dent's arrival, the household upended, the twins having a spectacular and poorly timed tantrum in the upstairs landing. Evelyn had set down her diary in the front hall when helping with luggage, and had entirely forgotten to retrieve it before placing the Hargreave documents on top of it in the satchel. She did not discover this until the post-rider was long gone. She searched the schoolroom. She searched her bedroom. She searched the hall table twice, methodically, and then stood very still in the middle of the corridor and retraced, step by step, the previous evening's movements. The satchel. She had put the satchel together on the hall table. She had set the diary down first. She was nearly sure of it. And then she had added the documents on top, and in the low light and the general noise of the household she had picked up the satchel and taken it downstairs without, oh no. She pressed her hand to her mouth, not in dramatic fashion, but in the practical way of someone who has just understood something unpleasant and is calculating the fastest route to damage control. She asked the footman when the post-rider had left. He said 6:30. It was now 7:40. The magistrate's office was 3 miles away. The post-rider would have already made his drop and continued north. She thought, with quick and anxious practicality, about the contents of the diary. She thought about Thomas's entry. She thought about the entry about Clara. She thought about the dinner party entry, and the entry about her former employer's wife, and the entry she had written last night about wanting to be chosen first. She thought about that entry sitting in a satchel of legal documents on its way to the magistrate's office, and she felt a wave of heat that had nothing to do with the proximity of the fire. But then she thought, it was going to the magistrate, not to society. Mr. Collins was 73 years old and famously uninterested in anything that was not a land dispute. He would perhaps glance at the documents, note the satchel's contents, and send the diary back with a polite note. She told herself this with some conviction. She was wrong about where the satchel was going. But she would not know that for several days yet. She turned back to Thomas's Latin. The diary is already gone. Evelyn doesn't know it yet. But somewhere in Northumberland, in a cold stone house with tall windows and a man who hasn't laughed in 4 years, it is about to land. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because what happens when the Duke of Ashford opens that satchel, what happens to him, is something you do not want to come to. Late, subscribe, hit the like, and tell me in the comments, do you think Evelyn would want him to read it? Or would she rather it burned? I want to know what you think. Back to the story. What Evelyn did not know, what no one at Thornfield Manor knew, except as the vaguest household rumor, was that the previous evening's disruption had included a second, entirely separate drama taking place in the front hall at almost the same moment as Mr. Dent's arrival. A military courier, a young man in the dusty red coat of Wellington's postal corps, had ridden through Derbyshire on his way north to Caldemere, the Duke of Ashford's estate. He had been given a satchel of correspondence at the last postal exchange point, handed to him in a hurry by a clerk who had confused 2 brown leather satchels, sitting side by side on the same counter. One satchel contained military and estate correspondence bound for the Duke. The other contained Evelyn's diary and the Hargreave legal documents bound for Mr. Collins. The courier had taken the wrong one. He had ridden north through the night, arrived at Caldemere with the dawn, handed the satchel to the Duke's steward, and been on his way back south before anyone at Caldemere had opened it. By the time Evelyn was standing in the hall at Thornfield Manor, pressing her hand to her mouth and calculating, the wrong satchel was already sitting on the Duke of Ashford's desk. 3 days passed at Thornfield Manor with their usual careful rhythm. The twins had their morning lessons. Thomas progressed through his Latin at a rate that suggested he would manage tolerably well in life, despite his complete indifference to the ablative case. Mr. Dent was everywhere, filling rooms with his opinions on agricultural reform, the deficiencies of the current government, and the precise degree to which the roads in Derbyshire were inferior to the roads in Hampshire. Evelyn smiled at the appropriate moments and retreated to the schoolroom. She did not find her diary. She applied to the magistrate's office through the housekeeper to inquire whether any extraneous papers had been included in the Hargreave satchel. Mr. Collins Clark-Tutt responded that the satchel had contained the expected documents and nothing else. She searched the front hall once more. She searched the road between the manor and the village gate. On the pretense of taking the children for their afternoon constitutional, walking slowly and examining the gravel with what she hoped looked like scientific interest in autumn leaves. Nothing. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that whoever found it, a road worker, a passing traveller, would not know who she was, could not connect the initials EA to any person of consequence, and would likely use the diary's blank back pages for something practical and entirely unsentimental. She told herself this every night before she slept. On the fourth night, she wrote in a cheap new notebook she had purchased from the village shop, the paper thin and slightly rough under her quill. It was not the same, but she wrote anyway, 'cause some habits are woven too deep for disruption. She wrote, "The diary is gone. It is strange how much I miss it. Not the pages already written, those are only paper, but the going there, the knowledge that when the day was too much, I could put it down somewhere that was entirely mine, and no one would ever. Well, someone may have it now. Someone may have read it. I hope if they did, they found it dull. I hope they set it down after 3 entries and forgot it completely. I hope they did not read the last entry." She stopped, stared at the ceiling. Then she wrote. "If they read the last entry, if some stranger in England has read what I wrote about wanting to be chosen, I hope they were kind, enough to find it merely sad and not pathetic. There is a difference. I have always thought there is a difference." She closed the notebook, blew out the candle. She was dismissed from Thornfield Manor 11 days after the diary was sent north. Not dramatically, not with any particular malice. It was, in its way, worse than that Mrs. Hargreave came to the schoolroom on a Monday morning with a manner so carefully assembled that Evelyn knew, before she opened her mouth, what was coming. Mr. Dent, it transpired, had a niece. The niece was currently without employment, a situation he considered remedied now that he had spent a fortnight at Thornfield and assessed the schoolroom's needs, and found them, in his estimation, met by an excess of governess. Mrs. Hargreave was very sorry. It was not, she was at pains to say, any reflection on Evelyn's performance. The reference she provided was adequate, competent, reliable, punctual, good with the children. She did not say Evelyn was remarkable. She did not say they would miss her. She gave her 3 days to arrange her departure and a quarter's wages in advance, which was, by the standards of the profession, more than many would do. Evelyn packed her trunk in 90 minutes. She was very good at packing. She wrote Clara a letter that was brighter than she felt, because Clara would worry if she knew the truth, and worrying would make her unhappy. And she didn't want Clara to be unhappy. She said only that her position at Thornfield had ended, and she hoped, if it was not too much trouble, to stay a few weeks while she secured a new post. Clara wrote back by the next post. "Of course you must come. Come at once. It will be lovely to have you." Evelyn read the letter. Read between its lines. The slight hesitation in the handwriting. The way, of course, was slightly too emphatic to be unconsidered. She folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket, and picked up her trunk and went out to meet the carrier cart she had arranged to take her to the coaching road. She did not look back at Thornfield Manor. She had learned long ago that looking back at houses that had not chosen you served no useful purpose at all. Caldermere, the Duke of Ashford's estate, Northumberland. November 1814. Caldermere had been built in the reign of Charles II by a Duke of Ashford who believed that architecture ought to communicate power without ambiguity. It had succeeded. The house sat on a rise above a wide river valley, its north face of pale grey stone, looking out across country. That had been Ashford land for 150 years, and it communicated power with a clarity that required no interpretation. Even the trees around it grew in straight lines, as though they had been informed of the expectation. William Ashford stood at the tall window of his study on the ground floor and looked at none of it. He had been home for 12 days. He had been expected home for 3 months. The war's final campaign had kept him on the continent through summer and into October, managing the surrender negotiations, the prisoner exchanges, the particular, unglamorous machinery of peace that followed the glamour of victory. He had arrived at Caldermere in the small hours of a grey November morning, ridden up the drive in the dark, handed his horse to the groom without speaking, and gone to bed. He had slept for 14 hours. He had woken feeling no better for it. His study table was occupied by 4 years of correspondence that his steward, Greaves, had sorted into careful piles. Estate business, parliamentary matters, his mother's letters, 6 inches of them, tied in 3 separate bundles, and a pile that Greaves had labelled, with diplomatic caution, social matters, which was largely composed of his mother's letters by other means. Lady Cecilia Hurst. The arrangement had been settled before he left for the continent. As much as these things could be settled at the preliminary stage. She was 22, the daughter of the Earl of Trentham, educated, accomplished, and entirely without objection as a prospect, which was, to William's mind, more or less the same as saying she was a good troop placement. Suitable, strategic, unlikely to cause problems. He had not felt anything about Lady Cecilia in any direction for the past 4 years, and the 12 days since his return had not clarified this. He had not felt much about anything. This was not self-pity. It was an observation of the same precise, undecorated kind he applied to troop assessments and supply route analyses. Something in him had gone quiet during the war. The part that responded to things beyond duty and strategy, and he was not sure whether it would come back on its own or whether it simply didn't. He had half decided it simply didn't, and was making his peace with that. He sat down at the study table. He picked up the top document from the estate business pile and read 3 paragraphs about the condition of the North Drainage Field before setting it down. He pulled the estate correspondence satchel toward him. The morning's post, delivered an hour ago, including several items from London. He unbuckled it. He expected estate documents. He had asked Greaves to have the week's correspondence consolidated. He lifted out the first items. A folded paper, a second, a third. He frowned. These were not estate documents. They were legal correspondence of some kind. Boundary disputes, property descriptions, a letter about a drain that referred to a property called Ashfield Farm, but not his Ashfield. A different Ashfield, somewhere in Derbyshire by the look of the letterhead. Wrong satchel. He set the papers aside. He reached back into the satchel and found, at the bottom, a small brown leather object with the initials EA pressed into the cover. He held it for a moment. It was a diary. This was immediately clear. The size, the softness of the leather, the small brass clasp on the civet. Personal, not his. He should set it aside with the other misdirected papers and have Greaves locate the correct recipient through the postal exchange. He set it on the desk and looked at it. He should open the satchel of his own correspondence and attend to the business of his estate, which was substantial and had been waiting for 4 years. He looked at the diary. It was small, barely larger than his spread hand. He had been in command of 32,000 men. He had made decisions that moved nations. He had stood on hills in the rain and watched the mathematics of war unfold beneath him with a cold, functional clarity that men twice his age said they had never seen in a commander. He was not a man who read other people's private diaries. He reached out and opened the clasp. He told himself he only wanted to find the owner's name to return it to them. He told himself this with such sincerity that he almost believed it. He opened to the first page. The handwriting was small, even slightly right-leaning. The ink was a deep brown rather than black, which meant either older ink or a cheaper pen. The small facts of economics were visible in handwriting, as they were visible in everything, to a man who paid attention. The first entry was dated September. He read the first line. "I have been informed today that I am unremarkable." He stopped. Read it again. "I have been informed today that I am unremarkable." Not in those words, because people rarely say the direct thing. They say the careful, padded version that means the same thing and is somehow worse. Mrs. Hargreaves said that the children were progressing quite well, which is what someone says when they mean adequately and no better than I expected from you. It is an evaluation delivered so lightly that you are not supposed to feel it land. But it lands. I have noticed that the lighter something is delivered, the heavier it lands. He sat back slightly. This was not what he had expected. He had expected a society girl's account of dances and calls and minor heartbreaks, the kind of diary he associated with the drawing rooms of young women whose lives had not yet taught them that the world was not, in the main, interested in their feelings. He was ready to close it after 2 sentences. He did not close it. Later, the children had their supper, and I was not invited to join the family for dinner, because there are guests, and a governess at a dinner party is a social inconvenience of the first order. I ate in the housekeeper's sitting room, which is warm and not unpleasant. But Mrs. Holt talked about her sister's gout for 40 minutes, and I found myself thinking, is this what the rest of my life sounds like? A long succession of other people's gout? I am not being ungrateful. I am being honest. This is the only place I am permitted to be honest, so I am making the most of it. He found himself, almost involuntarily, looking for the next entry, October 4th. There was a dinner party tonight. I watched from the upper landing through the banisters, which I am aware is undignified, but the alternative was hearing about it, second-hand from Mrs. Holt and her sister's continuing gout. The Earl of Somerton was there. I have seen him before at the Hargreave table. He is the kind of man who sits at the head of a room, not because he is the most important person in it, but because he has never once entertained the possibility that he might not be. He had an opinion about the war. He had an opinion about Wellington. He had an opinion about Napoleon, which he delivered at the sort of volume that assumes the table is composed entirely of people who have been waiting all evening for his view. It occurred to me, watching all of them, the careful smiling, the elegant posturing, the way none of them said what they actually meant about anything, that the entire English aristocracy is a performance put on by frightened people who cannot bear silence. All that confidence, all that noise, all that taking up of space, it is what frightened people do when they are terrified. of being left alone in a quiet room with themselves. I would feel sorry for them if they hadn't arranged the world entirely to their convenience and left the rest of us to manage in the corners. William set the diary down. He looked at the window. The grey November light was doing nothing in particular. He thought about the Earl of Somerton, who he knew by reputation. A blowhard of the First Order, a man whose opinions on the war were composed entirely of newspaper headlines and had, never once involved, standing in mud while it happened. He thought about the phrase, "A performance put on by frightened people who cannot bear silence." He had been in those rooms. He had been at those tables. The polite dinners, the regimental celebrations, the Parliament functions. He had sat in them and felt something he hadn't been able to name, a low, persistent sense of wrongness, as if the language everyone was speaking had a meaning beneath the surface that no one was acknowledging. He had never once heard anyone say out loud what that feeling was. This woman, E.A., governess, somewhere in Derbyshire, had named it in 3 sentences from behind a banister. He sat on the floor. He was not conscious of this decision. He simply found, a moment later, that his back was against the side of the desk, and the diary was open in his hands, and the candle on the desk was the only light in the room. He read, for 4 hours without stopping. He read the entry about her father, a clergyman who had borrowed against his living to send her brother to school, and whose creditors had arrived on the same day as his funeral. He read the entry about her previous employer, a Mr. Grantham, where she had been dismissed without reference. After Mrs. Grantham decided, without evidence and without basis, that Evelyn had been encouraging her husband's attentions. The entry was 3 pages long and written in a hand slightly less steady than the others, the ink pressure heavier in the places where the anger was greatest. "I did nothing," she had written. "I said nothing. I was as grey and careful and invisible as I know how to be, and it was not enough. It is never enough. There is a type of woman who sees a threat in everything that is female and near her husband, and the threat exists entirely in her imagination. But the consequences of that imagined threat are entirely real. I lost my position. I lost my reference. I lost 3 months of wages she refused to pay on the grounds of my conduct. I have no recourse. I have nothing. A governess has no legal standing to dispute a dismissal. She can apply to the next employer with whatever slender hope she has, and hope that the gap in her record is not too glaring to overlook. I think about what I would say if I could say the real thing. I think about it often. I never say it. I smile, and I write references available upon application in my advertisement, and I try again. I have been trying again my whole life. I am very good at trying again. I am exhausted by how good I am at it. He had been a general for 4 years. He had managed 10,000 men, each with their own private exhaustion, their own private courage, their own private terror. He had trained himself not to feel individual weight, to see the whole, the movement, the strategy, because a general who felt every individual weight could not function. But here was a woman who was not asking him to feel her weight. She wasn't asking him for anything. She was just setting it down in ink, plainly, without performance, without the elaborately arranged emotional display that polite society had developed for communicating difficulty. Without actually communicating difficulty, she was just saying the true thing. He had forgotten what that sounded like. He turned the page carefully. He found the entry about the letter from Clara, her sister. He found the entry about Thomas. "Your eyes are sad even when you smile," and read it twice. He found the entry about the wedding, October 28th. Clara's wedding was 3 years ago now, but I dreamed about it last night and woke up with The particular kind of grief that's embarrassing to have because it seems so small. She was married in St. Michael's in Ashford, a beautiful church, stone floor and tall windows, full of the best of Lord Brent's family on one side and the moderately polished remnants of ours on the other. There was a discussion before the ceremony about where I should stand in the procession photographs. In the formal portraits, I mean the ones done by the daguerreotype man in the vestibule. Clara wanted me in the front. Lord Brent's mother looked at my dress. My dress was blue. It was the best dress I owned. It was not a bad dress. It was simply not, by the standards of that company, a suitable dress for the front of a wedding portrait. Lord Brent's mother said, very kindly, very quietly, that perhaps I would be more comfortable at the back, given the photographs would be circulated. Clara looked at me. I smiled. I went to the back. I was comfortable at the back. I want to say that clearly. I was comfortable. But I have thought about that moment, that exact moment when Clara looked at me, and I smiled and went to the back. I have thought about it more than I have thought about almost anything else in 3 years. Not because it was cruel. It wasn't cruel. It was practical and social, and entirely of a piece with how the world works. I have thought about it because of what it meant that I smiled, that I went, that I made it easy for everyone, including myself, to pretend that it was fine. When did I learn to do that? When did I learn to make the hard thing so easy that no one, including me, has to feel its weight? He sat very still for a long time after reading that entry. He thought about the meetings he had managed in the war, the assessments, the decisions made with the information available. He thought about the number of times he had made the hard thing easy, made the decision look clean, look inevitable, so that no one else had to feel its weight. He thought about what it had cost to do that, over and over, for 4 years, and the particular sealed emptiness that lived in him now as a consequence. She had said it perfectly. When did I learn to do that? He found the entry dated November 10th, the last one. He read it slowly. When he reached the line, I am afraid that I will live my whole life waiting for that, and it will simply never come. He stopped reading and held the page very carefully, as though the paper itself was something that required handling with attention. He read the rest of the entry, not because I am unworthy of it. I do not think I am unworthy of it, but because the world has never once stopped moving long enough to look in my direction. He closed the diary, held it in both hands. The room was cold. He had let the fire die down without noticing. The candle was very low. Outside the tall windows of Caldermere, the Northumberland dark was absolute. He sat on the floor for another hour without reading anything. In the morning, there was a letter from his mother on the desk. It was about Lady Cecilia. He looked at it for a long time. He did not open it. He rang for Sergeant Hale instead. Richard Hale had served under William Ashford for 6 years, 4 of them in the Peninsular Campaign, 1 in Belgium, and 1 managing the Duke's household correspondence and domestic intelligence, with the same methodical efficiency he had once applied to scouting French flanking positions. He was 38, Northumberland-born, and constitutionally incapable of being surprised by anything the Duke did, including arriving at his breakfast room at 7 in the morning, with the expression of a man who has just received unexpected military orders. "There's a diary," William said, setting it on the table between them. "The initials are E.A. There's a reference to Thornfield Manor, Derbyshire. There's mention of a village church. The phrasing suggests it's within walking distance of the estate. I need you to locate the owner and return it. Quietly, Hale, no announcement." Hale looked at the diary. "Looked at quietly," he repeated. "Yes, No mention of the Duke of Ashford? No. Hale was quiet for one careful beat. And the satchel? The other papers? Return those through the proper postal channel. The diary is a separate matter. Hale picked up the diary with the manner of a man handling something that required more context than he currently possessed. When do you need this done? Within the week. Hale left that same morning. He rode south to Derbyshire with the efficiency of a man who had once tracked a French cavalry regiment across 40 miles of Spanish mountain country and arrived on time for the engagement. Finding one governess at one manor in rural Derbyshire should have been straightforward. It was not straightforward. He arrived at Thornfield Manor to find the household in a state of ordinary domestic flux. The housekeeper, Mrs. Holt, received him in the front hall with the mild suspicion appropriate to an unannounced caller with no clear social rank, and asked who he had come to see. "I have a small parcel to return to Miss Ashby," Hale said. The governess. Mrs. Holt's expression changed in the small, particular way of a person delivering unwelcome news, with the faint undertone of satisfaction that comes from having known it was coming. "Miss Ashby no longer resides here," she said. "She left the household 11 days ago. There is a new governess installed." Hale looked at her steadily. A forwarding address? None was given. She took the carrier cart to the coaching road at Bakewell. I couldn't say where she went from there. He was back on his horse within 10 minutes. He made inquiries in the village. The carrier cart man was found in his yard, a taciturn fellow who remembered the fare because she'd had a large trunk and 2 bags and had been going to the Bakewell coaching inn. The coaching inn had records. It took Hale the better part of a morning to work through them, during which time he developed a working theory that the postal system of England was held together by optimism and the habit of early rising. He found it eventually. A Missy Ashby, fare paid southward from Bakewell in mid-November, destination Lincoln, transfer point at Nottingham, Lincolnshire. A sister he remembered from his conversation with the housekeeper. There had been mention of a sister married to a lord, Brent somewhere in Lincolnshire. He had the county, he had the name. He rode back north to Caldermere, arrived at Dusk, and presented his findings to William in the study. "She's gone to her sister's house, Lincolnshire. Lord Brent's estate. I can have a name and location within 2 days." William looked at him for a moment. "I'll go myself." Hale did not blink. "You'll go yourself, sir?" "Yes." "To Lincolnshire?" "Yes, Hale. To return a diary to a governess." The pause was extremely brief. "Yes." Hale looked at his boots. Then he looked back up. "Very good, sir. I'll have the horses ready at 6. They rode as private gentlemen. No crest on the coach, no announcement of rank. William wore a plain dark coat and a civilian hat, and introduced himself in the 2 coaching inns they stopped at on the road south as Mr. Ashford of Northumberland, which was entirely true and entirely misleading in the way that only the most technically honest statements can be. He told himself, during the 2-day ride, that this was about the conspiracy. He had read the diary a second time before departing Caldermere. Carefully, this time with a soldier's eye rather than a human one. And he had found it. The entry from the previous summer at her employer Grantham's house before Thornfield. A casual description of an evening she had thought was a debt negotiation. There were 3 men in Mr. Grantham's study. I saw them through the library window, which I had opened for the air. I was not intending to observe anything. I was simply standing in the dark of the library with a book, which is where governesses go when the house gets loud. Mr. Grantham had the papers spread on the desk. The other man, the tall one with the northern accent, was pointing at what looked like a map. He said a name twice, Ashby Junction. He said the January convoy. The third man said nothing but wrote something down. I thought it was about his shipping business. He always has people about regarding his business. She had thought it was about shipping. She was half right. Ashby Junction was a military supply transit point. The January convoy was a scheduled transfer of medical and munitions supplies to the remaining English garrison in Calais. A French-backed smuggling ring had been trying to locate exactly that kind of inland routing information for 3 years. She had witnessed a handoff. She had written it down because she wrote everything down. She had no idea what she had seen, but Grantham knew she'd been in that library. He'd known the diary was missing, had likely known from the moment his wife found it gone and put together what the governess might have recorded. He would have been moving to locate it since November. This was urgent. Real. A matter of government security. William knew all of this. He was riding to Lincolnshire for entirely valid reasons. He was also riding to Lincolnshire because the diary was in his coat pocket, and he kept reaching in to check that it was still there, the way you reach for something you're not yet ready to give back. He stopped doing this when Hale caught him at it for the 3rd time, and said nothing very loudly. Brent Hall, Lincolnshire. Clara Brent, née Ashby, was 21, recently married, and doing her very sincere best to manage a husband who was not unkind but was considerably older, considerably more set in his preferences, and considerably less interested in his wife's family than Clara had anticipated when she'd accepted his proposal. She loved her husband in the particular, practical way of a woman who has chosen well by the available standards and is determined to make it work. She was making it work. It was simply more effortful than the poets had suggested. When Evelyn arrived at Brent Hall with her trunk and her 2 bags and the tired, careful smile that Clara recognized from their whole shared childhood. The smile that meant things were not fine, but she was not going to say so. Clara felt a rush of complicated feeling that she didn't have time to fully examine. She showed Evelyn to the smallest guest room, the only one available, since the east wing was being repaired, and said it was temporary and would be quite comfortable. The room was approximately 8 feet by 10, with a window overlooking the kitchen garden and a bed that was narrow but adequate. Evelyn said it was lovely. Clara held her sister's face in her hands for a moment and said, "I am glad you're here." And she meant it. Evelyn spent her first week at Brent Hall in the practiced routine of a woman who understands the importance of being useful. She helped with Lord Brent's 2 young children from his first marriage, energetic boys of 8 and 10, who had apparently gone through 3 governesses in 2 years, and were conducting what appeared to be a sustained campaign of attrition against the institution of formal education. Evelyn found them manageable. She had found worse. She wrote letters of application to 4 families seeking a governess, using the Vicar's reference and the Hargreave reference, which between them painted a picture of someone reliable and adequate and capable with children. She wrote them carefully in her best hand and dispatched them through the local post with the mild hope that one of them might produce something before the new year. She slept in the narrow bed in the small room and listened to Brent Hall settle around her at night, the old beams contracting in the cold, and tried not to feel the thing she was feeling, which was too much like homesickness for a home she had never actually had. She wrote in the cheap notebook. November 23rd. Lord Brent asked at supper tonight whether I intended to be here through Christmas. He did not ask unkindly. He asked the way people ask questions they already know the answer to and are simply establishing the record. I said I hoped to have a new position secured before the month was out. He said, "Excellent," and returned to his soup. Clara talked quickly about something amusing the children had done to fill the silence. She is very good at filling silences. I used to be better at it before I grew tired of the function. I have begun to accept that the diary is truly gone. The new notebook is not the same. The paper is different, thinner, the binding is stiff. But it is what I have. I am not sentimental about objects. Objects can be replaced. I miss it a little, that's all. She stopped writing, listened to the wind outside the kitchen garden window. I miss it because it knew me. That is a ridiculous thing to say about a book. But it was a book that had been with me for 18 months, that had collected every honest thing I'd managed to think in that time. A new notebook is just paper. The old diary was a kind of witness. I am being maudlin. It is late and I am tired. Good night. She closed the notebook and slept. She was in the small library at Brent Hall on the afternoon of the 26th of November, helping Lord Brent's eldest son with his arithmetic, which he was addressing with the resigned despair of someone who had come to believe that numbers were a personal affront, when Clara came to the library door. Her face was the color of fresh whitewash. "There is a gentleman at the door," Clara said. "He is asking for you." Evelyn looked up. "For me?" "By name. He says his name is Mr. Ashford." Clara's voice had a quality to it that Evelyn couldn't immediately read. Not distress, exactly, but a sort of overwhelmed attention, the way people looked when they'd encountered something larger than expected. "He says he has something that belongs to you." The arithmetic book slid from Evelyn's hands. She caught it, set it down on the table with great deliberateness. "Would you take James to the nursery, please?" she said, in the voice she used for situations requiring calm and getting away with not being calm about them. "I'll be along directly." She walked to the front hall. She was aware, distantly, that her hands were not entirely steady, and she kept them at her sides, where no one could see them do anything inconvenient. The man standing in the front hall of Brent Hall was not what she had assembled in her mind from the words "a gentleman named Ashford, with something that belongs to you." She had assembled something older, more bureaucratic. A solicitor, perhaps. Someone with spectacles and a mild manner. He was not mild. He was tall, taller than most rooms seemed to anticipate, with the kind of stillness that she associated with men who had learned to be as the calmest person in any given situation because the alternative was other people panicking. His coat was plain, dark, well cut. His expression was composed in a way that read, to Evelyn's sharp eye, as something that had been deliberately composed. The difference between a meaty face that was naturally still and a face that had been trained to present stillness. He was younger than she expected also. Perhaps early 30s. He had dark eyes. He was looking at her with an attention that was frankly startling. Not intrusive, just thorough. The way a person looks when they're completing a picture they've been working on for a while. He reached into his coat pocket. He held out her diary. She looked at it for a long moment, then up at him. "I believe I have something that belongs to you," he said. His voice was even low, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to without raising itself. She felt the particular, total heat of complete mortification arrive like a tide. "How long have you had it?" she said. Her own voice was admirably steady, she felt, under the circumstances. 12 days. 12 days. The entry about the dinner party, the entry about Clara's wedding, the entry about Thomas, the last entry. He had had it for 12 days. "Have you read it?" she asked. He looked at her directly. He did not flinch from the question. "Yes," he said. She said nothing for a long moment. She was aware of several things simultaneously. The weight of his gaze, the sound of her heartbeat in the silence of the hall, the absolute certainty that she was about to die of embarrassment. And it was going to take a regrettably long time about it. All of it, she managed. All of it. She absorbed this. She looked at the floor. She looked back at him. "I see," she said, "the entry about the dinner party." He paused. "You were right about all of it." Evelyn looked at him properly, for the first time since he'd walked in, not with the careful, oblique attention she'd trained herself to use in the presence of anyone above her in social rank, but directly as she was being looked at. "I was describing the Earl of Somerton," she said. "I didn't name him." "I know who you were describing," William said. "And you agree. I've been to those dinners," he said. "I've sat in those rooms." A brief pause. "I couldn't have said it the way you did." She studied him for another moment. She had been braced for condescension. She had prepared herself in the 30 seconds between the library and the front hall for the particular combination of amusement and dismissal that was most commonly applied to women who said sharp things about their betters. She had her response to it arranged in order: polite acknowledgement of the inappropriateness, graceful acceptance of the diary, quick exit. He had not given her that. He had given her agreement, delivered without performance, from behind those composed dark eyes. She didn't know what to do with agreement. She held out her hand for the diary. He gave it to her. Their hands did not touch. He was careful about that, she noticed. There was a precise, considered quality to how he moved in the space between them, as though he was aware of it. "Miss Ashby," he said, "I need to ask you about something. Something you may have recorded in the diary without understanding its significance." He paused. "May I explain?" She looked at him. She looked at the diary in her hands. She thought about the entries he had read. All of them, he had said, and the various private, furious, tender things she had put down in ink across 18 months of November evenings. "You have already read my diary," she said. "I suppose I can hear what you have to say." A small thing moved in his expression. Not quite a smile, the memory of one, perhaps. "Thank you," he said. Clara had appeared in the drawing-room by this point, and Lord Brent had been located and was occupying the doorway with the stiff, uncertain manner of a man confronted with an unannounced caller, whose rank was unclear, and therefore whose hospitality obligations were unclear. William introduced himself as Mr. Ashford of Northumberland, a private gentleman with a business matter to discuss with Miss Ashby, pertaining to some misdirected correspondence. Lord Brent's expression went through several readjustments as he attempted to calibrate the social weight of this. A private gentleman, business matter, misdirected correspondence. Nothing about this required hospitality, and yet the man's bearing had an authority to it that made Lord Brent feel, somehow, as though hospitality were appropriate. Clara, who was faster on her feet than her husband, said that, of course, Mr. Ashford must stay for tea, and would he like to sit in the drawing-room? Evelyn watched her sister manage the situation with the swift, quiet competence that she had always admired in Clara, and felt the familiar combination of gratitude and guilt that came from being the person whose complications her sister was perpetually managing. Tea was brought. Lord Brent excused himself after 20 minutes. Clara stayed a little longer, clearly deciding whether this situation required her active supervision. Something about William's manner, the precise, contained civility of it, the way he addressed Evelyn directly, and not as though she were a problem to be managed, seemed to satisfy whatever question she was assessing. She left them with a look at Evelyn that carried more questions than the English language had efficient answers for. They were alone. "What is it you need to ask me?" Evelyn said. He told her carefully about the entry, the men in Grantham's study, the map, the name she had heard, Ashby Junction. He was sparing with details. She had the clear impression he was choosing how much to tell her with the same precision he applied to everything else. "You said it looked like a debt negotiation," he said. It did. Mr. Grantham had considerable debts. He frequently had men about regarding. She stopped. She thought about the map, the military name. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone reordering a memory in the light of new information and not liking what the reordering produced. It wasn't a debt negotiation. No. What was it? He looked at her steadily. A supply route being sold to people who would use it to interfere with an English military convoy. Silence. "I see," Evelyn said, for the second time that afternoon. She said it more quietly. "The name you heard, the description of the men, the papers on the desk, the information in your diary entry is sufficient for the Crown to act. It is consistent with intelligence we already hold about this particular operation." He paused. "The man who you worked for, Grantham, knows that the diary is missing. He will have been looking for it since you left his employ." She absorbed this with the same careful stillness she had shown since he arrived. "Is that why you came?" she said. "The diary entry. It is part of why I came." He picked up his teacup and set it down without drinking. "I need 2 days to make some arrangements, to ensure that the information in the entry reaches the appropriate people, and that Grantham is managed before he can." He stopped. "I would like to ask your cooperation. I would like you to remain here for 2 days while I attend to this." "Remain here." She watched him. "Where else would I go?" Something moved through his expression. A small, private acknowledgement of the unfairness of the question. "I also want you to be aware," he said, "that your diary is entirely safe and will not be disclosed to anyone beyond the specific necessary parties." "My diary has already been read by a man I had never met," she said mildly. "Its privacy is somewhat theoretical at this point." "I'm sorry for that," he said. She looked at him. The apology was brief and direct, without elaboration or hedging. She was not accustomed to apologies delivered that way. Most apologies she received were elaborately padded affairs, designed to make the person delivering them feel better rather than the person receiving them. "I should like it back," she said, permanently. "It was returned to you when I walked in." She looked down. She had been holding it in her lap since the hall. "So it was," she said. They walked the grounds of Brent Hall the following afternoon, not by design, but by the particular accident of circumstance. Evelyn had been going to the kitchen garden for some air, and William had been coming around the east wing, and they had both stopped, registered each other, and then continued walking in the same direction because the alternative was retreating. The grounds were brown and bare in November, the kitchen garden cleared to bare earth. The ornamental paths puddled with the previous night's rain. The cold was real, the kind that gets into the gap between your collar and your ear and stays there. Evelyn had her grey wool coat on and her hands in her pockets, and she was walking at a pace that said she was going somewhere specific, even though she wasn't. "You disagreed with me at tea," she said, after they had walked in silence for long enough that it had become comfortable and then slightly too comfortable, which made her want to disrupt it. "When?" "I said that privacy was a luxury only the powerful could afford. You disagreed." "I didn't say anything," he said. "You were silent in a way that disagreed." He glanced at her sideways. There was something in it that she recognized from the hall. That quality of completeness, of looking at her as though she were something he had been piecing together. "I was thinking," he said. "And your conclusion?" He was quiet for a moment. The garden path turned and they followed it. "I think you were mostly right," he said. "I think the powerful can protect their privacy in ways that others cannot. But I don't think that means privacy is only theirs. I think everyone deserves a place where they are known and not managed." He paused. I had never. He stopped, reconsidered. "I had not thought about it in those terms before reading your diary." "You had not thought about privacy?" "I had not thought about the difference between being observed and being known." She said nothing for a few steps. She thought about those words, the difference between observed and known, and how precisely they named a thing she had been trying to name for years. "That is what I was writing about," she said finally, without knowing I was writing about it. "I know," he said. The silence after that was different, richer, the kind that has something in it. That evening, Evelyn wrote, she was in the small room with the kitchen garden window, the cheap notebook open on the narrow writing desk that she had borrowed from the library and wedged under the window for the light. The candle was large. She had asked the housekeeper for a larger one on the grounds that she needed it, for correspondence, which was true, and the light it threw was warm and steady. She wrote, "He listens the way very few people listen, not waiting for his turn to speak, actually receiving what's said, turning it over, giving it the weight it deserves. I noticed it again tonight at dinner, when Clara said something about the post roads, and he asked a follow-up question that was specific enough to prove he'd actually heard the first thing and not simply waited it out. I have been around enough people who wait things out to know the difference. He came here because of what I wrote. He came because of my words, because of something I set down in ink in a cold schoolroom in Derbyshire at 10 o'clock at night, when I thought no one would ever read it. That is the strangest thing I have ever written in any notebook, because it is the strangest thing that has ever been true about my life. I cannot decide if I should be horrified or the other thing. I am choosing not to name the other thing. I am writing in a notebook that has already demonstrated a tendency to go places without my permission." She closed the notebook, sat for a moment with her hands on the cover. Then she opened it again and wrote, quickly, as if speed would make it less real. He sat on the floor to read it. I asked him this afternoon if that was true. I'd written in the diary that I imagined the Duke of Ashford was the kind of man who had never once sat on a floor, and he said he had in fact sat on the floor of his study to read it. He said it without any particular expression, as though it were just information. I don't know what to do with that. Good night. The following morning brought Lord Ashley Hurst. He arrived at Brent Hall in a shining carriage with the Trentham crest on the door and the easy confidence of a man who had been well born and had never had occasion to reconsider whether this was deserved. He was perhaps 28, fair-haired, with a smile that was genuinely charming and eyes that were professionally friendly. He asked for Mr. Ashford with the warmth of a cousin inquiring after family. But there was something behind the warmth that was calibrated rather than felt. Evelyn was in the hall when he arrived. She saw William come out of the library where he and Hale had been working, and she watched what happened to his face. It was very small. It would have been invisible to someone who hadn't spent the last 2 days paying close attention. A tightening, a setting. The composed mask that she recognized as trained behavior came down over the man she'd been talking to like a shutter over a window, and what remained was the Duke of Ashford, cool, immovable, precise. Lord Ashley shook his hand with great warmth. "Ashley, man, I've been sent to find you. My sister is beginning to wonder whether you've been waylaid by highwaymen." He laughed. It was a good laugh, practiced, easy. "Mother sends her regards. There is some talk of finalizing the announcement before Christmas. if you're inclined." "I'm not at Caldermere," William said. "No, clearly." Lord Ashley's eyes moved to Evelyn with the particular sweep of a man inventorying his social environment. She felt herself assessed and categorized in approximately 3 seconds. Governess, no rank, no consequence. She was familiar with the feeling. She donned up lightly and looked at a point 6 inches past his shoulder. "I have some business to conclude here," William said. His voice was even. "I will be in London within the week. The announcement can wait." Of course." Lord Ashley smiled again, looked around the drawing room, looked at Evelyn again, with slightly more attention this time, and then back at William with the pleasant, curious expression of a man who has formed a conclusion and is choosing not to say it yet. "I'll pass that along, then. Shall I tell my sister you're well?" "Tell her I'm attending to some urgent matters," William said. It should reassure her. Lord Ashley left after 20 minutes. Evelyn did not watch him go. She was looking at William, who was standing very still in the drawing-room doorway, until the sound of the carriage retreated down the drive. Then he turned and saw her looking at him. The mask slipped only slightly, only for a moment. "His sister," Evelyn said, in a voice from which she had carefully removed every inflection. "Lady Cecilia Hurst?" "Yes," he said. "She is expecting an announcement." "She is," he said. A pause. "It was arranged before I left for the continent." Evelyn looked at the window. "I see," she said, for the 3rd time in 2 days, and this time she heard it in her own voice. The way she always said "I see" when she saw something she had been a fool not to expect, and was furious at herself for not expecting. She excused herself. She went upstairs. She sat on the narrow bed in the small room with the kitchen garden window and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked up the cheap notebook and wrote 1 line. Of course, William found Hale in the library at 7 that evening. Hale looked up at him with the expression he used when he had decided not to say what he was thinking, which generally lasted approximately 30 seconds. "She's applying for governess positions by letter," Hale said. William sat in the chair by the fire. He looked at the fire. "Her sister's husband wants her gone by Christmas," Hale continued. "The children like her. She is managing to be helpful without being asked to be helpful." Which is, he paused. "She is a capable woman, sir." "I know," William said. 30 seconds of silence. "The Cecilia matter," Hale said. "Don't. I'm not saying anything. You're about to." Another pause. "I had a letter from London today," Hale said. "Grantham has traced the diary to Lincolnshire. He has men on the road. They may arrive as soon as tomorrow evening." William was very still. "Why did you not tell me immediately?" he said. "I did tell you immediately. I'm telling you right now." Hale met his gaze. "I would also like to point out that she still does not know the full extent of the danger. She can't run. If she runs, it alerts him that we know he's coming. I agree. But she should be informed that there is danger." William stood up. "I'll tell her in the morning," he said. Hale looked at him with the flat, a patient expression of a man who knows that telling someone a difficult thing in the morning is what people say when they have decided not to think about why they are delaying it until the morning. "Very good, sir," he said. He did not tell her in the morning he had intended to. He had the morning planned. He would find her in the library or the kitchen garden. He would explain the situation directly, and, without alarming embellishment, he would tell her that his regiment was positioned 2 miles north, and that she was protected, that she needed only to stay indoors and let him manage the external threat. He had planned all of this in meticulous, military terms. What happened instead was that she read to him from the notebook. She hadn't intended to either. He found her in the library at 8 in the morning. She was there before him, a book open in her lap that she was clearly not reading. And he sat in the chair opposite and asked her, on an impulse he couldn't fully account for, what she was writing about lately. She said nothing. Then she opened the notebook to the previous evening's entry. She read it in a low, even voice that did not look for anything in his face while it was reading. She read about the morning walk, about what he had said regarding the difference between observed and known. She read the part about Lord Ashley's arrival, and then she stopped. She closed the notebook. He had not moved while she was reading. He was looking at her face, which was arranged with great precision into an expression that was giving him very little to work with. The entry about the diary being gone, he said. You wrote that you missed it because it knew you. She looked at him. You have never been unremarkable, he said. That's the thing they got wrong. Every person who told you that, they got it wrong. Evelyn held the notebook in both hands. She was very still. You are telling me this, she said carefully, while your arranged betrothal to Lady Cecilia Hurst is being finalized in London. He didn't flinch from it. Yes, he said, and what do you want me to do with what you just said? Nothing, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything with it. I'm telling you because it's true, and because someone should have told you a long time ago. She looked at him for a long time. Something moved in her expression. Something that was neither hope nor its dismissal, but something quieter and more complicated than either. She stood up. She put the notebook in her coat pocket. I am going to the stables, she said. Thomas, Lord Brent's groom, Mr. Sims, I should say, mentioned this morning that one of the carriage horses has a loose shoe, and I said I would ask Clara to send for the farrier. I expect that's not interesting to you, but there it is, Evelyn, he said. She stopped at the door. He had not used her given name before. He was aware of this. She was aware of it. The word sat in the library air between neither retracted nor elaborated. Be careful today, he said. She looked at him, a slight, precise narrowing of the eyes. Is there something you're not telling me, Mr. Ashford? There may be people coming to the estate today who have no good reason for being here, he said. I need you to stay inside. What kind of people? Men sent by Grantham. She absorbed this without visible alarm, not because she wasn't alarmed, he thought, but because she processed things inward before anything showed on the surface. You knew about this before today, she said. Yes, and you didn't tell me. No. She looked at him with an expression of such calm, measured, precise assessment that he felt it more acutely than he had felt most things in the last 4 years. I see, she said. She went out. He heard her boots on the stone floor of the hall, and then the sound of the front door, and then nothing. He should have stopped her. He had been about to say, stay inside, and instead, she'd walked out before he could get to the part where he explained why. He stood up, and he was already moving toward the door when he heard the sound of horses on the drive. 2 horses, hard-ridden, too early for anything expected. He reached the window. Grantham's men were not subtle. They came in the late afternoon, not the evening. One of those miscalculations that come from men who plan for soldiers and arrive facing civilians. 4 of them, riding fast from the south gate of the estate with the particular aggressive haste of people who believe they are the most dangerous element in their current situation and have not done much to verify this. William had spent the preceding 6 hours doing things that looked, to the outside observer, like the ordinary business of a gentleman attending to correspondence. He had written 3 letters. He had spoken to Hale 4 times at intervals. He had sent a message via a fast rider who had quietly left by the North Gate at noon to Sergeant James Alderton, who was presently encamped with 32 men of the 3rd Light Dragoons. 2 miles north of Brent Hall, on the grounds of a temporarily vacated farm property, waiting. He had told no one at Brent Hall about the dragoons. He had also ridden out at 3 in the afternoon, under the pretense of checking the road, and had assessed the southern approach, the gates, and the positions of Brent Hall's 2 outdoor servants. He had positioned Hale at the east wing, with a clear line of sight to the drive. He had made arrangements with the head footman, a large, sensible man named Jeff, to ensure the inside of the house was manageable. He had done all of this, and he had still not adequately communicated the situation to Evelyn, and this was an operational failure he was aware of with considerable precision. When the 4 men came through the south gate, William was in the front hall. He went to the library first. She was not in the library. He went to the drawing room. Not there. He went to the foot of the stairs and called, quietly, to Clara, who appeared on the upper landing with wide eyes and a baby on her hip. "Where is your sister?" he said. "She went to the stables," Clara said. "An hour ago." "About the horse." "An hour ago." He went through the house at a controlled pace that was not quite a run, because running in a civilian house in front of a frightened woman was counterproductive. He exited through the kitchen. The cook, a large cheerful woman named Karen, pressed herself against the wall to let him through, and crossed the kitchen garden at a pace that was now definitely a run, because the stable was at the north end of the property, and the south gate was behind him, and the sound of the arriving horses was already audible. The window of the library room was open. He had not opened it. He stopped, looked at it, looked at the kitchen garden path, calculated. She would have gone the direct way to the stables, through the side gate, around the north wall. He went north. The stable at Brent Hall was a long, low stone building with 6 stalls and a hayloft, and the smell of horses and straw, and the particular musty cold, that is a distinct category of cold, all its own. The chestnut mare with the loose shoe was in the second stall. Mr. Sims, the groom, a weathered man of perhaps 50, Lincolnshire born, the kind of solid that suggests he had never in his life been hurried by anything short of a fire, was examining the shoe when Evelyn arrived. She had spoken to him for 20 minutes about the horse, and then about the general state of the winter, and then about the price of hay in Lincolnshire as compared to Derbyshire, all of which she was genuinely interested in, because she was interested in most things, and Sims was a man of considerable pragmatic intelligence. If you took the time to ask him questions, and then listen to the answers. She had been making her way back toward the hall when she heard the horses on the south drive. She had a soldier's ability to read tone from sound. She didn't. She was a governess, but she had a governess's ability to read household disruption from context, and the sound of 4 horses arriving fast at 4 in the afternoon with no expected delivery had a quality that she would have written in her notebook as not right. She had gone back to the stable. She had found Sims already at the door, looking toward the sound with the narrowed eyes of a man who knew his property's rhythms. "Those aren't expected," she said. "No, miss," Sims said. He had the careful manner of a man assessing something he didn't yet understand. "Stay here," he added, with the slightly too firm emphasis of someone who has decided they are going to go find out what was happening, and would prefer not to be responsible for anyone else's welfare while they did. "Mr. Sims," Evelyn said, "I will come with you." He looked at her. She looked at him. This lasted approximately 4 seconds, at the end of which Sims got a pitchfork from the wall rack, and Evelyn stood her ground on the ground that there was nothing to get from the wall rack other than a pitchfork, and he already had that. They heard footsteps, quick, purposeful, not the household staff, coming around the north wall. Two men came into the stable entrance. They were large, rode dusty, and had the flat, assessing eyes of men who were being paid to find something and had not yet found it. The taller one looked at Sims. The shorter looked at Evelyn with a direct, calculated attention that was not remotely polite. "Miss Ashby," the tall one said. Not a question. Evelyn said nothing. She was standing between Sims and the wall of the nearest stall, and she had, without fully deciding to do it, positioned herself such that Sims was at her left and the stall wall was at her right, which was a defensible posture in a limited sense and an impractical one in most senses. But it was what was available. "We need the notebook," the tall man said. "I don't know what you mean," she said, "the notebook, and the diary before that." He took a step forward, "the information in it, whatever you wrote about." "I write about the children's Latin lessons and the quality of the hay in various counties," Evelyn said. "I can't imagine why that would interest anyone." The shorter man said something to the taller man in a voice she couldn't hear. The taller man looked at Sims and the pitchfork with the expression of a man doing a quick and not particularly daunting calculation. Sims raised the pitchfork. He did it with enormous, magnificent composure, the way a man raises a pitchfork when he has decided that whatever comes next is going to have to go through him first. He was 50 years old and built like a cart horse, and he raised that pitchfork with absolute conviction. Evelyn felt, in that moment, the same thing she had felt at Clara's wedding when she went to the back. A clarity, cold and precise. She was not going to let Mr. Sims be hurt for her. She reached into her coat pocket. She took out the notebook. "Here," she said. She held it up, not extending it toward them, just making it visible. "This is what you've come for. If you want it, you can have it." The tall man took a step toward her. The stable doors opened. William walked in. He was not running. He was moving with a particular quality of motion that she had not seen on him before. Every step deliberate, every inch of his bearing communicating something she did not have an immediate vocabulary for, which was, "This space is mine now." Behind him, Hale. Behind Hale, two men she recognized as soldiers by the way they moved. The tall man had turned. His hand had gone to his coat. "Don't," William said. The word was extremely quiet. It landed in the stable like a stone dropped down a well. The tall man's hand stopped. William looked at the two men for a moment with an expression that was entirely professional and entirely without warmth. "You are in the grounds of a private estate. You are surrounded. Sergeant Hale will take your weapons, and then you will come with me." He paused. "If you are cooperative, you will be uncomfortable but uninjured. If you are not cooperative, you will be both." The shorter man looked at his companion. Some calculation was performed. The result, apparently, favored cooperation. Hale moved forward with the brisk efficiency of a man who had done this before many times, in settings considerably less stable-scented. William walked past the two men. He walked past Hale. He walked past Sims, to whom he gave a brief, genuine nod that Evelyn noticed contained actual respect rather than the performed kind. He stopped in front of Evelyn. She was still holding the notebook in the air. She slowly lowered her arm. They looked at each other. Outside, from the north, she could hear it. The sound of horses, many horses, the measured, steady percussion of organized cavalry. "You positioned soldiers," she said. 2 miles north, he said, "since noon. You knew they were coming." "Since last night," he said. She looked at him with an expression that had many things in it and was letting none of them out in the wrong order. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he said. Sims set his pitchfork down against the stall wall with a decisive clank and walked out of the stable with the bearing of a man who had defended what needed defending, and now had a horse to attend to. Evelyn looked at the notebook in her hand, then at William. And then? She wasn't entirely sure it was going to happen until it did. She laughed. It was startled out of her. The way laughter sometimes is when the alternative is something considerably less manageable. Not a polite laugh, not a controlled laugh, but a real one. Sharp and brief, her hand going to her mouth after it as if she'd surprised herself. He looked at her, laughing in the dim, straw-smelling stable, with the sound of his cavalry regiment arriving on the road outside, and something moved in his face that she had not seen there before. He laughed. It was quiet also, startled also, and it lasted approximately 4 seconds, and then it was gone. But for 4 seconds the Duke of Ashford laughed, and it was, without any question whatsoever, the most unguarded thing she had ever seen happen to a person's face. She stopped laughing, looked at him. He stopped, looked at her. "How long has it been since you did that?" she said quietly. 4 years, he said. Grantham was arrested 2 days later in Derby, located through the network of military intelligence that Hale had activated from the moment William arrived in Lincolnshire. The 2 men from the stable were held overnight and delivered to the appropriate authorities in Lincoln with a written account of events. The diary entry, corroborated by a second source that William's connections had produced through the week, was sufficient evidence for the government to move against the supply route operation. The appointment for which Grantham had been angling was cancelled. The January convoy was rerouted. The relevant minister wrote William a letter that was, by the sober standards of government correspondence, practically effusive. It was 3 days after the stable when William found Evelyn in the kitchen garden. She was sitting on the low stone wall at the far end, looking at the bare earth of the vegetable beds, her hands in her lap. She was wearing her grey coat. The morning was cold and clear, the first genuinely clear day since November had arrived, and the pale winter light was doing its best. He sat on the wall beside her. Not close, appropriately distant. She did not look at him, and he did not look at her, and for a minute they simply sat. "I received a letter from London this morning," he said. She said nothing. "I wrote to my mother 4 days ago. I told her the Cecilia arrangement could not proceed." He paused. "I wanted you to know that. Before anything else, I say." A long quiet. The kitchen garden had a robin in the bare apple tree. It sang 4 notes and stopped. "Why?" she said. "Because I've known since Caldermere that I couldn't go through with it. And I should have acted on that before Lincolnshire. I should have acted on it before I rode south. I've been," he stopped. Started again. "I have spent 4 years making decisions by the fastest, most efficient route, and I have become so accustomed to the efficient route that I did something genuinely stupid. Which is, I didn't tell you that the arrangement was already finished in my mind before I came here. I let you find out from Lord Ashley. That was wrong. I'm sorry." She looked at the bare earth for another moment. "I wrote something in my notebook," she said, after he arrived. "I wrote, of course, 2 words. That was the whole entry." "I know," he said. "I saw it." She turned to look at him. "You read my notebook? You left it open on the library table. I saw the 2 words. I didn't read the rest." A pause. "I wanted to. I didn't." She absorbed this. "Restraint," she said. "After a fashion." After a fashion, he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze, the way he held everything, completely, without offering an exit route. "You read my diary," she said, "the whole of it, 12 days, yes?" "Yes, and you came to Lincolnshire." "Yes. Was it the conspiracy that sent you south, or was it something else?" He looked at the kitchen garden wall. He had been a general for 4 years, and had never in that time been asked a question he did not want to answer. He looked back at her. "The conspiracy was the second reason," he said. "Hale told me you had left Thornfield Manor. I was already planning to ride south when he found the evidence in the diary entry. I want you to know that. I need you to know that. The conspiracy was real and urgent, and I would have acted on it regardless. But I came to find you before I knew about it." She looked at him. "You were the first," he said. She heard those words and did something with them that her face did not entirely show. She turned and looked at the vegetable beds again for a moment. Then she reached into her coat pocket and took out the cheap notebook. She opened it to the previous page. She wrote something. She closed the notebook and held it out to him. He took it, opened it. She had written, "You sat on the floor." He looked up at her. "I did," he said. She looked back at him, a long, steady look, undecorated, making no particular effort to be anything other than exactly what she was. Then she said, quite simply, as if she were noting the weather, "Then yes." He was quiet for a moment. He was a man who had commanded 30,000 soldiers, and had not once, in 4 years, permitted himself to want something this specific. He wanted it now. "I should tell you," he said, "that I am not especially well practiced at this. I have been away at war for 4 years, and before that I was." He stopped. "I am out of practice with wanting things." "You seem determined for someone out of practice," she said. "You make it easier," he said. She looked at him with the particular expression she got when she was trying not to smile, and had mostly managed it. "I am a governess," she said. "I have no fortune, no rank, no family consequence that means anything in your circles. I have an adequate collection of references, a cheap notebook, and a small talent for describing pompous earls." "I know," he said. "You are the Duke of Ashford. I am. People will have opinions. People always have opinions," she said. "I've spent 4 years on battlefields. I have a high tolerance for noise." She looked at her hands. She looked at the notebook he was still holding. She looked at the winter kitchen garden, and the robin, and the pale, clear sky. "I wrote something else in that notebook," she said, "the night after you arrived. About the way you listen." "I didn't read it," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "I'll tell you instead. I wrote that I didn't know what to do with a man who listened the way you do. I wrote that it was the strangest thing. I wrote that I was choosing not to name the other thing I was feeling, because the notebook had a history of going places without my permission." He held her gaze. Something in him had unclenched in a way that 4 years of battlefield discipline had completely prevented. "Name it now," he said. "You have my complete attention." She looked at him for one more moment. Then, with the same direct simplicity that had characterized everything she'd said to him since the day he walked into Brent Hall's front hall with her, diary in his hand. "Hope," she said. "I was feeling hope. I didn't know what to do with it because I hadn't felt it in a very long time. But there it was." He took her hand. Both of them looked at this briefly, as if checking that it had happened. "I read your entry," he said, "about wanting to be chosen first." "I know," she said. "I want to be the answer to that entry," he said. "That is what I am telling you. I am not practiced at this. And I will probably do several more things wrong in the next 12 months before I remember how to do them right, but I want to be the answer to that entry." She was quiet for 1 heartbeat. 2. "You've made a reasonable start," she said. "Arriving with my diary and sitting on floors is a promising method." "Ah," he laughed. Real and quiet, the same unguarded thing she'd seen in the stable, and this time it lasted longer. She laughed too. The robin in the apple tree sang again. The winter light came down clean and cold over the bare Lincolnshire garden. 3 months later. February 1815. The notice in the London Gazette was brief and, by the standards of notices involving the Duke of Ashford, remarkably unremarkable in its language. The betrothal of His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, to Miss Evelyn Ashby, formerly of Derbyshire. No mention of rank, no mention of fortune. The notice was the same 32 words, whether the bride was a duke's daughter or a governess. William had written it himself. Clara had wept when Evelyn told her, which was unexpected, and therefore the most honest thing Clara had done in the preceding year. Lord Brent had been speechless for 40 seconds, and then said, with genuine if slightly dazed warmth, that he wished them very happy. Hale had said nothing at all and gone to check on the horses, which was his most reliable response to anything that moved him. Lady Cecilia Hurst, it was reported in various drawing-rooms by the spring, had taken the news with admirable equanimity, and was understood to be considering a match with a viscount from Hampshire who was reportedly very amusing at cards. This was generally considered a reasonable outcome for everyone involved. William's mother wrote him a letter that was 8 pages long and expressed, in varying registers, everything from wounded dignity to grudging admiration for anyone who could move her son to pointed observations about the lady's social standing, too. In the last paragraph, in smaller writing than the rest, as though she'd written it quickly before she could take it back, the admission that she had not seen her son laugh in 4 years, and if this young woman had restored that, then she was not entirely without qualification for the position. He read her the last paragraph when Evelyn arrived at Caldemere in February. She stood in the hall of the house, the tall, cold, implacable house that communicated power with the clarity of stone, and she looked up at the ceiling and around at the proportions and the light and the pale northern stone, and she said, in her dry and careful way, "It is larger than I expected." "I thought you might find it excessive," he said. "I find it magnificent," she said. "I simply also find it excessive." She looked at him. "That is not a complaint." "I know," he said. He showed her the library. She stood in it for 2 minutes without speaking. He watched her take in the shelves, ceiling height, every wall, the kind of library that had been assembled over generations, by people who actually read, and the evidence of the reading was in the wear on the spines, the pencil marks in the margins of the older volumes, the leather of the ladders darkened at the handholds from decades of use. "On Tuesdays," she said at the door of the library, "I would like access to this library." "You may have access to it any day of the week," he said. She turned to look at him. "You said Tuesdays." He shook his head. "I didn't say Tuesdays. My previous employers—" "I'm not your employer," he said. "I'm going to be your husband." She was quiet. She looked at the library again. "Every day," she said. "Every day," he agreed. Caldemere, the evening before the wedding, March 1815. She wrote by candlelight in the tall study that would be hers by morning. The fire was large and generous. William had the fires built properly here, she had noticed, because he paid attention to cold, the way a man paid attention to a thing he had once not been able to control, and had since decided to manage wherever possible. The diary, the original, small brown leather one with the initials E.A., was on the desk beside the new notebook. She had kept both, which had seemed, for a while, like a sentimental redundancy. She had changed her mind about that. The old diary was not the same as the new notebook. It was the place she had been before. "You kept those." She opened the new notebook. "Tomorrow I marry the Duke of Ashford. I will write that again so I can see it. Tomorrow I marry the Duke of Ashford. I have been turning it over in my mind all evening, looking for the angle that makes it unreasonable, looking for the catch, the place where the story breaks and you see the join, where someone did someone else's thinking for them, and the whole construction becomes less convincing up close. I have been looking for it, because I have spent 24 years in a world where things that seem too good to be exactly what they appear always turn out to have a different explanation. I cannot find the catch. He is sitting one floor below me right now in the study, reading the estate documents that Greaves left him this afternoon. I know this because I went past the door an hour ago, and the light was on, and I could hear the occasional sound of a page turning. He reads at the same careful pace he does everything, completely, without the half-attention that most people bring to most things. He read my diary that way. Every entry, every honest, unguarded, overly specific word. He came to Lincolnshire before he knew about the conspiracy. He told me I was the first. There is a woman who is going to read this someday. In 10 years or 20 or 50, someone who finds this notebook in a drawer or an attic, and she is going to wonder if it was really like that. If anyone ever really had exactly the thing they were afraid they'd never have delivered in exactly the terms they were afraid they'd set too high, I want to tell her, yes, it is exactly like that. It doesn't look the way you imagine it will. It comes in through the wrong door, through a misdelivered satchel and a courier's mistake, and a duke sitting on the floor of his study in Northumberland, with your most private words in his hands. It comes when you are in Lincolnshire, being a poor relation with a cheap notebook and 2 letters of reference, and absolutely no reason to expect anything remarkable. It comes because you wrote the true thing down, because you didn't lie about it, even to yourself, even in ink, even when lying would have been so much easier. Write the true thing down. This is what I know. Write it down even when you are afraid of it. Write it down in the cold room, by the bad candle with no one watching. Write it down because it is yours, and because yours matters, and because somewhere in England there might be a man who needs to read it more than he knows. She set the quill down, looked at the candle. She closed the notebook. She left it on the desk, open to that last entry, and went to find the large library, and the fire that would be burning in it, and the man reading one floor below. The morning of the wedding, she wore ivory, not white, which was for the very young and the very innocent, but ivory, which was a colour that knew something about the world, and had made its peace with the knowledge. Clara had come to Caldemere with Lord Brent and her own children and her stepchildren, and an amount of luggage that suggested she had been preparing for this occasion in her mind for considerably longer than the engagement had officially existed. She did Evelyn's hair herself, with hands that shook slightly, which Evelyn did not comment on. The church at the edge of the Caldemere estate was small and old, the stone worn smooth in the places that centuries of hands had touched. The morning light came through the plain east window in clear winter bars. The pews were full. The Ashford tenants, the local families, the friends and acquaintances of a duke who had been away 4 years and was now home, and was marrying a woman that no one had predicted, and everyone was curious about. She walked in from the north porch rather than the south entrance, because the north porch looked out over the river valley, and she had wanted to see that view one more time before she went in and changed her life. She saw it the river, the pale winter hills, the morning sky doing its careful, impersonal, magnificent thing. She thought about the girl who had written by tallow candle in an unheated schoolroom in Derbyshire. The girl who had gone to the back of her sister's wedding portrait because her dress wasn't fine enough for the front. The girl who had lost her diary and told herself it was only paper. She thought about the entry she would write tonight. She went in. He was at the front of the church. He was wearing military dress, the medals and the dark coat, the formality of it. And he was standing with his back to her, because she had not yet entered, and he was facing the altar as convention required. And then someone near the back made a small sound, and he turned. He looked at her the same way he had looked at her in the hall at Brent Hall when she first came around the corner, complete. The way you look at something you have been piecing together for a long time. He looked at her and did not look away, and she walked toward him down the cold stone floor of the old church and thought, without sentimentality, but with total precision. I am the first, 5 years later, Caldemere. 1820. The schoolroom at Caldemere smelled of chalk and books and the coal fire that was never, ever allowed to go inadequate, and the morning light came through the tall windows in long, steady bars across the table where Henry Ashford, 4 years old, was engaged in the profound intellectual labor of deciding whether to eat the end of his pencil. "Henry," his mother said, from the other side of the table, without looking up from the letter she was writing. "If you eat that pencil, you will have nothing left to write with." Henry considered this. He put the pencil down. Evelyn finished her sentence and looked up at her son. He had his father's dark eyes and her own precise, assessing gaze, and he had developed at 4 years old the habit of asking questions that required actual answers, which she found entirely reasonable, and William found both alarming and deeply, secretly gratifying. "Mama," Henry said, with the gravity of the very young and the genuinely curious, "why do we write things down?" She set her pen in the rest. She thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "Because," she said, "some things are too true to say out loud, and some things need to be kept so that the person you are now can speak to the person you will be later. And some things," she paused, looked at the window, at the river valley below the rise. "Some things you write down because the world is very large and you are very small in it, and writing is the way you say, 'I was here, I thought this mattered to me.' And sometimes, very rarely, the right person will read it." Henry processed this. He picked up his pencil. "And then what?" he said. She smiled. The particular, full smile that William said he had waited 3 months to see in its complete form, and that had not, in 5 years, stopped surprising him. "Then everything," she said. She wrote that night in the library at Caldemere, in the diary that was now its 5th volume. Proper leather, good paper, the initials EAA on the cover, the last initial added in February of 1815 at a registry in Northumberland. Henry asked me today why we write things down. I gave him an answer that I think was true. I will give myself a shorter one here, where I am allowed to be short. I write things down because a courier once made a mistake, and a man once sat on a floor, and everything that followed, every warm, impossible, astonishing thing that has followed, began in ink. He was never meant to read my diary. By dusk, he emptied a battlefield to find me. Write the true thing down. The right person is reading. If you have traveled this whole road with Evelyn, from the cold schoolroom to the kitchen garden, from the back of the church portrait to the front of her own, if you felt everything she felt along the way, then you already know what kind of story this was. There is something I want to leave you with before you go. This story was about many things: conspiracy and courage, and the particular bravery of a woman who kept showing up after the world kept looking through her. It was about a man who had concealed himself so tightly against feeling that it took someone else's private words to crack him open. It was about the long, patient work of not giving up on yourself, even when every available signal suggests that giving up would be the sensible option. But at its heart, this story was about something very simple, something I want you to carry out of this library and into your actual day. Your honest voice matters, not the performed voice. Not the voice that says what is expected, or what is safe, or what keeps the peace in rooms that do not deserve your peace. The real one. The one you write down at 10 o'clock at night, when the candle is low and no one is watching, and you finally let yourself say the actual thing. That voice has weight. That voice has reach. That voice travels further than you will ever know. Evelyn Ashby wrote in a cold schoolroom because it was the only place she was allowed to fully exist. She wrote without hope of an audience, without expectation of consequence, without anyone ever telling her that what she had to say was worth saying. It was worth saying. It was worth everything. And Evelyn teaches us something else, too. The danger of performing fine, of going to the back of the portrait with a smile, of making the hard thing so easy for everyone else that you forget to feel its weight yourself. We learn, as she learned, that invisibility is not protection. It is only postponement. The world will see you eventually. The question is whether you will have practiced being seen by then. William teaches us that power and feeling are not opposites, that the most capable, decorated, formidable man in England still needed to be reached by an unguarded voice. That achievement without connection is a very cold kind of life. That it is not weakness to sit on the floor and read something that undoes you. It is the bravest thing available. And Evelyn's diary entry, the one that broke him open, is perhaps the most important thing in this story. I am afraid that I will live my whole life waiting for that, and it will simply never come. She wrote that entry for herself. She wrote it because it was true, and because truth needed a home. She did not write it as bait, or as performance, or as communication. She wrote it because the alternative, pretending it wasn't true, had become too costly, and a man read it and recognized the truth in himself. Write the true thing down. Say the real thing, at least to yourself. Be the person who has practiced being known so that when the right door opens, when the courier takes the wrong satchel, when the impossible thing becomes possible, you are ready to walk through it. You are not unremarkable. The world simply hasn't stopped moving long enough to look in your direction. Not yet. Thank you for listening, and before you go, one thing. If you carried any part of this story with you, Evelyn's words in the cold schoolroom, William on the floor of his study, the kitchen garden, the church, the then everything, then this channel was built for you. Subscribe so the next story finds you. Leave a like so the algorithm knows someone here was moved. And in the comments, tell me the one line from this story that you are taking with you today. Just one line. I will read every single one, and I will be in the comments saying hello. We built something real here today. I will see you in the next story.